Hey everyone. So I had a chance to see Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness on opening night with my best friend. His birthday was coming up and we had both been looking forward to this one, so we thought that opening night would be a good way to celebrate. And for the most part, he really enjoyed it. I enjoyed getting to watch it with him, and at the end of the day, I guess that's what matters most. But now that I've had a chance to collect my thoughts on the movie, it's time to give my in-depth review. So Phase 4 of the MCU hasn't done a lot for me so far, with Spider-Man No Way Home being the exception. But that movie also featured Doctor Strange, the multiverse, and the return of characters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man movies. So I'm not gonna lie, when I saw that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was now being directed by Sam Raimi, I was actually pretty excited. Of course, I was also a bit skeptical. We've seen plenty of times before how a director's unique vision has had to be fused into the expected Marvel formula, so part of me was worried that bringing in Sam Raimi wouldn't save the movie as a whole. And unfortunately, that's what happened here. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of great Sam Raimi stuff throughout this movie, and he does deliver some truly exceptional sequences that elevate this above other Marvel movies. And however critical I may get in this review, this is certainly nowhere near as bad as movies like Eternals or Black Widow, but it's also nowhere near as good as it could have been if they'd polished the script a little more, so let's dive in and take a look at this one. Fair warning that I will be discussing the entire plot, so this will have major spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie yet and don't want to be spoiled, I'd recommend watching it first and then coming back to this review. With that said, let's get into it. So the movie immediately jumps right into a fast-paced action scene where we meet a teenage girl and an alternate version of Doctor Strange. While I can appreciate a movie wanting to kick off with a bang, it's kind of hard to be really invested in the action when you don't know these characters or what they're doing in the first place. In a movie like Star Wars, we would have an opening crawl and a bit of dialogue to give context before jumping into the fun action. Without a reason to care, it's just another big CGI Marvel action scene. The scene continues and the characters have to avoid dangerous obstacles, escape the giant monster, and fight for dear life. However, this is when one of the biggest problems of the movie becomes apparent: America Chavez. I don't want to be too critical here, but Xochitl Gomez just doesn't have any range in her acting. No matter what life-threatening situation she's in, she almost always has the same expression on her face, and she honestly just doesn't sell the character for me. Granted, her character isn't very compelling to begin with since she's mainly used as a plot device, so I guess that could give it a pass. Either way, her lack of character is really distracting when she's alongside a seasoned professional like Benedict Cumberbatch. Speaking of which, this version of Doctor Strange decides that it's too risky for America's powers to fall into the wrong hands, and he prepares to steal her powers, breaking her heart that her friend would betray her. This also begins to set up Doctor Strange's arc in the rest of the movie, or at least what's supposed to be his arc, but we'll get back to that later. Before he can take America's powers, this version of Doctor Strange is killed, and she manages to escape to another universe. Meanwhile, on good old Earth 616, I love that reference to the comics by the way, we meet up with our Doctor Strange, attending the wedding of his former love interest Christine Palmer. The only thing more awkward than that is the standard Marvel humor injected into this conversation, but don't worry, we'll get plenty more of that later. Strange and Christine catch up after the wedding and seem to be on pretty good terms until they inevitably get around to why their relationship didn't work out in the end. She tells him that he always has to be the one holding the scalpel, so to speak, always needing to be in control, and basically can never fully let anyone in. This sets up the second arc for Strange in the film, about learning to let people in again, but just like the first arc that's been set up for him, I personally feel that both of these ideas are half-baked in the context of this film and not developed nearly as much as they could have been. And before you give me the whole "it's a Marvel slash superhero slash comic book movie, it's just supposed to be fun, you're overanalyzing the script," to that, I respond that a movie should be able to have a solid story and still be fun. Besides, most blockbuster movies are fun these days, so good writing is what determines what I actually want to see more of. We've seen comic book movies in the past that had a great script, a compelling story, and fully developed ideas, all while being fun and having plenty of crowd-pleasing moments. One of them was even directed by the guy who directed this movie, and that one handled similar ideas much more effectively, but we'll get back to that as well. The wedding reception is interrupted by a monster that appears in the city streets, and so Strange does a quick change and makes a pretty cool exit. Strange confronts the beast downtown, and once again, I find it hard to be fully invested in the action. Sure, there is a lot of visual creativity on display, as we've come to expect from Doctor Strange, but it's still a big CGI battle with an alien creature through the city streets. We've seen quite a lot of that already. During the fight, Strange recognizes America from his dream, which we learn in this universe is actually people gazing into the lives of their alternate selves from across the multiverse. The monster monster is defeated, and Strange and Wong have a quick chat with America that catches them up. And we get even more of that Marvel comedy that's supposed to be funny but really just comes across as annoying bathos that interrupts what we're actually supposed to be focusing on. America is also hesitant to trust Strange since the last one was willing to sacrifice her, and here we start to see what will be a recurring problem with Strange's arc. His need to prove himself to others isn't really related to any of his faults in the context of this film, but because of the actions of his alternate selves. Now that I've gone back and seen the trailers, they really made it seem like this movie was going to be a result of Strange interfering with the multiverse back in Spider-Man No Way Home. It's clear now that they did this to hide the reveal that Wanda is actually responsible for what's happening, but in any case, it highlights what's missing in the movie. I understand what they were going for with Strange's arc. The multiverse allows him to get a glimpse at his other selves and the mistakes that they made, so it's like looking in a mirror and seeing what you have the potential to become. But that doesn't really hit home the way it should because it doesn't have a strong enough connection to Strange's struggle in the movie. He certainly made mistakes in the past, but they're hardly ever brought up by the other characters unless it's a detail from his past that doesn't really have to do with who he is now. And while they had a solid start by showing how Strange's responsibilities means that he doesn't have a very fulfilling personal life, they don't do enough to drive that home in a way that would make us care. And he himself is never tempted to use magic or the multiverse to solve his own problems, so it feels empty when the other characters distrust him or fear his potential actions. Again, these are all good ideas on paper, and there are plenty of ways that they could have made it work, but for me, a lot of it comes across as half-baked. Since I mentioned it earlier, let me use Spider-Man 2, another Sam Raimi film, as an example of how to better illustrate and execute similar ideas. Peter Parker's life is kind of a mess in Spider-Man 2. He's dealing with pretty much every relatable problem you could think of, and his responsibilities as Spider-Man are only making those problems worse. Not to mention that despite all his heroic efforts, the media and many New Yorkers just don't trust him. Because of this, his relationships start falling apart and his spider powers stop working, and so he decides to give up being Spider-Man to just focus on Peter, and suddenly his life is great. But the city is in danger without Spider-Man, so he has to don the mask once again to save the day. Then at the end, Mary Jane, having finally learned his identity, tells Peter that he deserves happiness too. She acknowledges the danger she may be in, but that Peter should allow her to choose for herself, and so the movie ends on an uplifting yet bittersweet note. All of this results in a story that is compelling, consistent, and has Peter truly grow as a hero and a man by the end. Now, I'm not saying that Doctor Strange had to follow this formula exactly, I'm just trying to demonstrate how the movie's themes and ideas could have been delivered in a more interesting way. Getting back to the plot, Strange realizes that this threat is actually witchcraft, and so he decides to seek out Wanda Maximoff for help. Now, I love how the reveal was handled in this scene. Wanda seems like she's truly changed since the events of WandaVision and strongly regrets her actions in that show. Her magic is so convincing that it even fools Strange himself. But then she slips up by mentioning America's name, something I didn't catch until Strange pointed it out. Wanda then drops the illusion of the peaceful farm, and I love how her manipulation of reality looks exactly like when Thanos used the Reality Stone back in Infinity War. This scene managed to be a pleasant surprise, yet it also made sense given what happened at the end of WandaVision. We last saw her donning a new Scarlet Witch outfit and practicing strange new magic in isolation, so for a minute I was wondering what happened to that. But it doesn't stop there, because it turns out that Wanda is the main villain of the movie, and she wants to steal America's power so that she can travel between the multiverse at will, and find a world where she can actually be a mother to the children that were only an illusion on this Earth. Which means I now have to start talking about my problems with Wanda in the movie. I really did love that scene, and I respect that they actually committed to making Wanda a full-on villain throughout the film. I guess I just wish her transition into villainy had been handled better. I know she did terrible things out of grief in WandaVision, and Strange says that the dark magic she's using has corrupted her, but her transformation into a villain still feels sudden to me. I imagine you'll be especially confused if you haven't even seen WandaVision. Now, it's not like Wanda becoming a villain doesn't make sense. She started off as an antagonist in Age of Ultron, and Scarlet Witch is also an on and off villain in the comics, but like anything, it's all about execution. If they wanted to make her this much of a villain, then her descent should have been handled more gradually over previous stories. They also probably shouldn't have included this moment at the end of WandaVision.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
Yeah. But even if her transformation had been handled better, she still acts like your standard somewhat two-dimensional Marvel villain, which is a little hard to get behind for a character who spent so many movies as a hero. Throwing in a quick explanation to justify it doesn't automatically make it work. And why exactly is Wanda only thinking about her kids? What about the parents she lost? What about her brother? What about her home, her friends, her lover? I could understand if losing her fantasy world in WandaVision was the last straw for her, but the fact that she's not thinking about any other people she's lost, ones who actually existed, is really baffling to me. It honestly kind of reminds me of how they handled Black Widow in Age of Ultron, having her constantly focus on romance and not being able to have kids when there's a lot more they could have done with her character. Oh, wait, maybe not. She could have even used that to tempt other characters, like the scene where she shows up at Kamar-Taj and tells this one sorcerer to run. I thought she was going to get inside his head and mess with him or tempt him with something, like she did in Age of Ultron. Seems like another missed opportunity to me. During said fight, Strange and America are thrown into the multiverse and end up stranded on another Earth. I actually really liked this Earth. I thought the plant life through the city was an interesting choice. I liked the overall visual aesthetic, and of course meeting new or alternate characters. They go to this Earth's Sanctum Sanctorum to ask its Doctor Strange for help, only to find a statue saying that he gave his life defeating Thanos. I initially thought this would harken back to Strange's conversation at the beginning of the movie, where it's called into question if there was anything else he could have done in Infinity War and Endgame. That actually would have tied into the plot nicely and given Strange another struggle to overcome, but like most ideas in the movie, it's kind of thrown in and then not developed into something interesting. They meet this Earth's version of Mordo, and we learn that our Mordo apparently went crazy and tried to kill Strange after the events of the first movie. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that they revealed it this way. I mean, it's been years at this point and Doctor Strange is only now getting a proper sequel, so I suppose it makes sense to just acknowledge it and move on. Still, I was always curious to see the payoff to that original post-credit scene, and it's kind of annoying that it happened off-screen. Of course, they also do that a lot in Young Justice, one of my favorite shows, and I didn't have a problem with it there, so maybe I'm just a bit biased in this case. Anyway, this version of Mordo seems nice at first, but then he slips something into their drinks that makes them pass out. They wake up in a lab, supposedly quarantined because they could have carried some kind of virus from their universe. Makes sense. But then Strange is immediately let out, so I guess that part actually wasn't a big deal. Thankfully, this leads to one of my favorite scenes in the movie, one that really takes advantage of the multiverse, as we are introduced to the Illuminati. They're made up of Captain Carter, who you may recognize from What If, Black Bolt, King of the Inhumans, who's apparently played by the same actor as the Inhumans TV series, so that's neat. This Earth's version of Captain Marvel, who's actually Maria Rambeau, best friend to Carol Danvers on Earth 616. Dr. Reed Richards, also known as Mr. Fantastic, which got a good cheer out of the audience in my theater. And finally, Professor Charles Xavier, played by Patrick Stewart himself. This was such a huge surprise for me since I didn't see the trailer, and I love how we hear a bit of the theme song from X-Men the Animated Series, which is actually really good, by the way. I started the first season recently, and it's getting a revival next year, so I'd recommend checking it out. Getting back to the Illuminati, this was just really fun to see. Sure, it's a lot of fan service, but it takes advantage of the multiverse to have some fun, and they don't overstay their welcome, so I think it works. I'm sure it's also setting up the X-Men and the Fantastic Four in the MCU, either in the main timeline or on another Earth. The Illuminati reveal that their Doctor Strange actually wasn't killed fighting Thanos. He tried to go it alone and made the mistake of using the same dark hold that now afflicts Wanda, so the others had to destroy him before he could do any more harm. So now they're worried that this Strange may be just as dangerous, so they plan to vote on what to do with him. This once again highlights my problem with the movie, that this Strange is being judged for the actions of other versions of himself. This could be compelling if he had previously been tempted in a similar way, or if his past mistakes were made relevant here, but without that, it just doesn't feel earned. Also, the fact that the Illuminati are ignoring what he's trying to tell them about Scarlet Witch kind of makes them seem stupid and arrogant. It's not like their Doctor Strange was wrong about Thanos being a threat, just that using the dark hold wasn't the way to do it. And now this Strange is telling you that Scarlet Witch is using that same dark hold to come after an innocent child, and they act like it's no big deal. They'll handle it. So basically, they know nothing about this Strange to really condemn him. They aren't seriously considering his pleas for help, and they don't seem to consider that in an infinite multiverse, of course there are going to be less than ideal versions of certain people. And couldn't Xavier just read his mind and then telepathically share it with the others? Aren't these supposed to be the smartest people on the planet? Let's move on. Before they decide what to do with Strange, Scarlet Witch arrives, and this is where the movie is really able to shine. It starts out like it's going to be your typical superhero brawl before quickly turning into a full-on massacre. A lot of the other action and horror elements in the first half of the movie felt like they were held back by the PG-13 rating, similar to what happened with the Venom movies. But then this scene comes along and is both intense and surprisingly violent despite its constraints. I actually found myself jumping back at a couple moments, so this is definitely a case where Raimi's signature style really delivered something awesome. Of course, you also realize that they just introduced some fan favorite characters only to immediately kill them off, but in an infinite multiverse, I'm sure they could come back for future movies and TV shows. Strange is able to trick Mordo with some pretty clever manipulation, and he manages to escape after a pretty awesome fight with some excellent music. That's another thing I have to give this movie major props for. I wouldn't say the score as a whole is amazing, but there are some pretty fantastic musical moments. The themes for Doctor Strange and Scarlet Witch before they dreamwalk come to mind in particular, as those musical cues felt powerful and were creatively orchestrated. That's not even mentioning the insane music note battle that comes later in the movie. I may not be impressed with everything, but when this movie's creativity works, it works. Our heroes then manage to enter the multiverse and find the Book of Vishanti, but Scarlet Witch appears and destroys it, capturing America in the process. Strange and Christine seek out yet another strange doppelganger to ask for his help, only to discover that he too has been corrupted by the Darkhold. After defeating him, Strange decides to use the Darkhold himself to dreamwalk back to his universe and save America, but Christine quickly accuses him of being as bad as the others. And again, that would feel more compelling and earned if we had actually gotten to see some of that from our Steven before, but like most of his actions, this is really just him doing what he has to in an impossible situation. So basically, his arc in the movie is finally convincing those around him to shut up and let him do his thing, which he does. Strange begins to perform the dreamwalk, but Christine asks how that's possible if there's no living Strange on his Earth. We then get another great and horrifying reveal that he's dreamwalking into the dead Strange from the beginning of the movie. Once again, another great Sam Raimi moment that made me glad he directed this. Strange battles Scarlet Witch and manages to free America. We see something that tends to be a problem for a lot of female characters in modern Disney movies. Just like what happened in Captain Marvel, Strange tells America that she can do this, that she's always had what she needed, and then she's suddenly able to use her powers perfectly. It's another case of a character not growing gradually over time, but rather realizing they always had what they needed. Now, to be fair, they do show that she ultimately can't defeat Scarlet Witch on her own, and we do see her struggling with her new training at the very end of the movie, but this was still a moment that didn't feel very compelling, especially for a character who wasn't that well written or acted to begin with. Still, she does get a pretty clever moment where she gives Wanda what she wants, taking her back to the universe where her kids are waiting for her, and of course they're absolutely horrified to see what she is, pleading for their real mother. It reminds me of Kingpin in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I honestly kind of feel handled its villain just a little better. I'm comparing this not only to another Marvel movie about the multiverse, but also to another Spider-Man movie, which is ironic since Sam Raimi is so well known for his Spider-Man movies. How about that? Getting back to Wanda, how exactly did she think this was going to end? How did she expect children to react to a violent murderer trying to take the place of their actual mother? I know Wanda was corrupted by the Darkhold, but does that make you stupid as well? Wanda was never really a character I would have considered stupid in other movies, so it's kind of a shame to see her reduced to this kind of villain who doesn't think things through. And of course, instead of immediately attacking the woman who possessed you, tried to kill you, and almost took your kids, since she could snap at any moment, this Earth's Wanda sympathizes with her, telling her that they'll be loved and okay. Just another moment of characters showing sympathy and understanding to Wanda in a way that didn't really make sense given the context. So Wanda is transported back to her Earth, and having seen the error of her ways, she decides to destroy the Darkhold for good, even at the cost of her own life. I do want to reiterate that there are parts of Wanda's story in the movie that I do like. It's an interesting idea to have an Avenger slip into full-on villainy and madness, only to have a final moment of redemption where they sacrifice themselves to fix their mistakes. I guess I just wish it had had better overall execution. Strange parts ways with Christine, telling her he loves her no matter what universe she's from, and she tells him to let people in again. It may not have been developed nearly as much as I'd have liked, but it was a nice moment of closure nonetheless. Back at Kamartaj, America begins her training as a sorceress, and Strange and Wong have a really nice moment, acknowledging the price they pay for their calling, but willing to accept it anyway. Strange then finally follows the ancient custom by bowing to the Sorcerer Supreme, which was a nice little bit of development between the two. In the final scene, as Strange walks off to start making the most of his life, he suddenly collapses and develops a third eye, a result of having used the Darkhold, and then the movie ends. Or so it would seem. We then get a mid-credit scene of a sorceress showing up and telling Strange that they need to fix what his actions have caused. He has no idea who she is and not a single reason to trust her, but he just hops into the portal anyway. Ah well, Marvel credit scenes, what are you gonna do? And there we have Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Obviously, this movie was a mixed bag for me. There were plenty of great elements that I liked, but there were also plenty of problems with the story that I felt could have been easily fixed. It's always strange to me how a studio can put so much money and effort into bringing a script to life, but they can't always be bothered to make sure the script is fully polished first. The result is that many of the interesting ideas feel half-baked, and some of them honestly would have been better to leave out entirely. And while Sam Raimi does bring his unique style to much of the film, it's still a Marvel movie and not always for the better. It's similar to movies like Black Panther and Shang-Chi, different enough to get people's attention but not risking too many differences for fear of alienating general audiences. So in the end, it still feels too similar to most other comic book movies we get nowadays. But like I said at the beginning, no matter how critical I am, it's by no means a terrible movie, and it's nowhere near as bad as movies like Black Widow and Eternals. If you enjoy Marvel movies and want to have some fun while also getting some unique horror elements in the mix, then you'll probably have a good time. I guess these days I just have to be a bit more picky when there's so much superhero content out there. I still had quite a bit of fun with this one, and it introduces many elements and concepts that I hope future Marvel projects will take advantage of. But what did you think of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness? Do you agree with my thoughts, or am I being overly analytical? Well, time to bring this to a close. Thanks for watching, enjoy life, and I'll see you in the next one.